Hey guys, I just want to go ahead and show you how you should be doing your tactics. A lot of the time it is about looking at the forcing moves. Forcing moves in chess are those that put the king in danger with check or capturing the opponent's piece. We have a lot of options here. To capture, we have 0 checks, so I'm going to look at the captures. If we take the rook, the opponent can recapture with the knight. You always want to look at your opponent's forcing moves as well, checks and captures. The opponent has the other option to give a check with the knight, but that would not work as we would take with our rook. So black's option would be after rook takes rook, knight takes rook, and the material is equal. But white has a different capture they can do, which is bishop takes knight. And in this case, if rook takes rook with check, we can then capture the rook with our bishop. We win 2 pieces instead of just 1 per trade. So the correct combination is bishop takes, rook takes, bishop takes. Black had another option to take our bishop on a6, but we would just recapture with our rook. That was not of worry. Now, this is a brand new account, so you see that my rating went from 1500 to 1745. If I get any wrong, it goes down. I'll go and just give some examples. Once I get to about 25 puzzles or so, it'll give me less points per puzzle. Right now it's kind of guessing what my rating is at. So I'm going to purposely lower it for now to kind of get to the level that you guys might be. And I think 1300 is pretty good. All right, so here's a good puzzle. We want to look at checks and captures first. So checks, we have 1. Queen takes rook, hits the king. It looks bad as the opponent can recapture with their rook. Now, we could just stop there and look at the next check. There are no checks. We can look at captures. But we see that both these captures don't really yield much. If we take the knight, we lose a queen. If we take the queen, we just trade. However, we might get a rook out of it. But tactics are usually where we're winning material or delivering checkmate, but sometimes it will be a defensive tactic. In this case, it is an attacking winning tactic, and this is when you need to go back to your original moves and look 1 move deeper. So let's look at our checks again. We have queen takes rook check. After rook takes rook, we look 1 move deeper at our checks again. We have 2 different ones. We have bishop takes rook, or we have rook to e1 check as well, as the rook on f1 has moved. So the correct combination in this case is not to take the rook with the bishop, as the king will capture and we have no good follow-up, but to give the check with the rook, and this is checkmate. As the rook cannot retreat, he is pinned to his own king. So sometimes a move may look bad at first, but if you look 1 move deeper, sometimes it's the best. Here we go again. Look at checks and captures. I see 1 check. I do not see any other checks other than queen to g7. Queen to g7 doesn't look good, as they would just capture us with their bishop. Queen to h8 check looks bad as well, because the king would take our queen. But then we could look 1 move deeper. Can we get anything else after each of those moves? So queen to g7, bishop takes. We have no more checks, but we have another capture. But after the king captures our bishop, we're down a queen. Not a good trade. But we could do queen takes bishop, king takes queen, and we have a new check, 2 of them. We could either give a check with the bishop on g7, or we can give a check here on f7 with the knight, which would also be a fork on their queen and bishop. In this case, I don't know if that's the best move yet. It looks pretty good, but it's just a trade. We are going to be getting a bishop and a queen for our queen and knight, and a pawn. But is a pawn enough to answer this puzzle? Sometimes, sometimes not. We have to look at 1 more move in the position, just past the check on f7 and winning their queen. and that's the fact that we have a different capture in the position. We have h takes on g4. The knight is hanging. So, after queen check on h8, king takes, knight to f7 check with the fork, king moves the safety, back to g8. We're going to go ahead and capture their queen, and at that moment, we're up one piece, which is the bishop. They would like to recapture our piece to get the material back, but then we win their knight. What they could also do is maybe take our bishop here. However, we can then save our knight on d8 by capturing their bishop on c6. And we're still going to be up the piece in that variation. So queen takes on h8, knight takes on f7 check, knight takes on d8. Sometimes the puzzle will just stop before going one more move ahead. This is why it's important to make sure that before you make your move, you know it's the right move for the right reasons, not just guessing, and not because you were just lucky. Luck belongs to the strong. You need to be a strong chess player first to get lucky almost all the time. Next puzzle. We want to look at checks and captures again. We have a check on f3 and a check on d3 with the knight. I see no more checks for black. Of those two, one that comes with the capture looks pretty strong, so we'll start with that. What are white's options in response? Well, to get out of check, they can either move the king. They're down a piece, though they don't want to do that. They want to try to get the piece back if they can. So capturing our knight with the bishop, or capturing the knight with their pawn. Of the two, they'll probably capture with the bishop, as they don't want to ruin their pawn structure. But that's more strategy based. In this case, this is just a tactic. And the opponent does not have time to capture our queen on c7 because their king is in check. What you'll notice is that our queen can take their bishop as well, but with our knight in the way, she is unable. But with the forcing move check, we force the knight out of the way, they take back, and then we take their bishop on f4 for free. Next puzzle. Again, we look for checks and captures again. There are no checks in the position. Now I'm looking at captures. We can capture here on f4 with our rook. A rook is 5 points, and a bishop is 4 points, or 3.5. And we don't want to give away a 5-point piece for a 3.5-point piece, unless we have a good reason. I don't see a good follow-up after that. We have no new checks after that. So I'm going to look at another type of capture. We have knight takes on e5. This does not look good, as the queen could capture, and there'll be threatening checkmate. Then, if you have no check or capture that is good, you want to look for the threats in the position. A threat is putting the opponent's piece in danger of capture. So, this queen has very limited squares. She can only move up and down this file safely, save for that move, and not that move either. She can go only to g4 safely. So, I'm looking at ways to attack the queen, because she almost looks like she's trapped. Well, I do have two ways to attack the queen with the rook. I have two more ways. I have two ways to do it with the queen here. I have one way here. Of all those options, queen here just hangs a queen. Rook here, the queen could just run away to g4. Rook to h7 is just a free rook. Queen to f7 is a trade of queens. Queen to g6 is a free queen. So we can eliminate or get rid of all those capture or all those moves as possibilities. Then finally we have rook to g8, rook h to g8, or rook f to g8. Rook h to g8 allows the queen to escape to either h7 or h6 because the rook no longer controls the squares. But the other rook, rook on f8 to g8, will put the queen in danger. She cannot retreat to g7 because of our rook still. And she cannot go along the 7th row because of our rook, our queen, and our king. And finally, she cannot go to f6 because of the knight still covering the f6 square. Even though the rook moved from the defense of the f6 square, that's still covered by a different piece. So we'll play rook to f to g8, queen captures our rook, and we'll just take, proving our advantage. A couple more. Again, looking for checks and captures. I see a check here, I see a check here, and I see another check here. Of all those checks, I'm going to eliminate this one as an option because it just hangs a rook. At least for now. You never know it's going to be best in the future, but for now, I'm going to eliminate it. Rook takes rook. Looks pretty good because it comes with check and it's a capture. And then bishop to d7 does not look very good because it can be captured by 3 different pieces, 2 of which are legal. So only one move right now looks like a decent move for white to play. However, what are black's options after being in check? Well, they can take with the king, or they can take with the rook. Of those 2 choices, black is actually able to escape. What I'm noticing here is the black king has no squares to go to thanks to these beautiful bishops. He has no escape squares. His own pawn stops him, and his own rook stops him. So I might not want to let him move his king away or let his other rook come into the game. Instead, we're going to go back to the original bad-looking check, which is rook to c1, which hangs our rook right away. But we do have a follow-up. We could play our other rook to capture the bishop, put in the king in check, and the king has, like we mentioned before, no escape squares. Plus, they cannot block with any piece along the c file. Last, the rook cannot be captured by any other piece. So rook to f1, even though we thought it was a bad move at first, we decided to look one more move ahead after that. And we find out that it would be winning. The computer will play some random moves sometimes, and we'll just capture, and that is checkmate by the hashtag. Just to show the other variation, if bishop takes our rook, we take back with our rook. Same thing. This is also checkmate. Next puzzle. Checks, captures, threats again. We have a capture and a check at the same time. We have a check here. And I do not see any other checks in the position. So, also looking at the position, I noticed that we have 1 bishop and they have 2. So they're ahead in material. Sometimes we should not trade when we're down in material. However, we do have an exception that breaks this rule. We have a very strong pawn on a3 who's 2 squares from making a queen. So, if we move our queen with check out of the way, the pawn can move to become a queen. Before I take the queen though, I want to make sure that the opponent cannot stop our pawn from making a queen. So after queen takes, king takes, pawn push, can white cover the a1 square with any piece? Yes, they can, with the bishop to d4. However, bishop to d4 is not a safe move for the bishop because of our pawn on e5 would capture the bishop, after which we would then push the pawn to a1. If queen takes, king takes, pawn push, and king to c2, the king is also not close enough to stop our pawn. So, although we're down a piece, we have to recognize our strengths in the position. Our strength is a pass pawn. In this case, it's called an outside pass pawn, a pawn on the sides of the board, far away from the king. That cannot be stopped. If bishop here, we would just take and continue the plan. It is important not to just pre-move, because if you pre-move, you might mess up the puzzle. And chess is all about being perfect. You want to be right. Next puzzle. Doing it again, checks, captures, and threats. We have 1, 2, 3 checks in the position. We have captures as well. We have bishop takes pawn. It's a free pawn. And rook takes pawn, and rook takes pawn. But I want to look at the checks first because they're the most forcing. The opponent has to do something about them. Rook to e8 is not good because we would just hang our rook. Maybe it is good later, like we saw in the last puzzle, or 2 puzzles ago where we sacked a rook. But in this case, we have no follow-up. Bishop to e7 gives the king 2 options to go to g8 or to e8. If he goes to e8, we have possibilities of moving our bishop away for discover checks on their king. And then last, we have bishop to g7, which we can recognize the king only has one legal move, and that would be the g8. It's easiest to look at the lines where your opponent has the least number of options. You do those first, you can do them quickly, and then you can eliminate them if they're not good. So I like to look at bishop g7 first. Bishop g7 check, supported by our pawn. And the king cannot go to the e file because of our rook. The king goes to g8. Do we have a new check in that position? We do. We have two new ones. We have pawn to h7, and we have rook to e8 check. Pawn to h7 hangs a pawn, so I'm not going to quite move him. He's also supporting our bishop on g7, so we don't want to lose our bishop due to the king. So bishop g7, king g8, and I look at rook to e8 check. The king, again, only has one legal move. He has to go to h7. And then finally, we look at our checks one more time, and we see rook from e8 to h8 is a checkmate supported by our bishop, hitting the king. The king is unable to take the bishop due to the pawn. He cannot take the rook because of the bishop, and he cannot take the pawn because of the bishop and rook. So we'll start with bishop g7 check, rook e8 check, rook h8 checkmate. This helps a lot to reduce the thinking time in your chess games. Instead of looking at every single possible move in the position, you look at checks first because they're forcing, and that gives your opponent very few number of moves to choose from. If you do a capture, they have a lot more moves to choose from. And if you do just a normal move, they have even more moves to choose from. So checks first, then captures, then threats. Again, we look at checks, captures, and threats. We have a check here on c8. We have a capture here and a capture, capture on e6, capture on a6, capture on d4, capture on f4 with the rook. A lot of options. Again, I will look at the most forcing first, and we have queen to c8 check. What are the opponent's options? Well, they can block. They can block, and they can move the king to h7. Both of these blocking moves, black will choose the one that attacks back, if possible, and that would be rook to e8, which hits the queen, and we lose a turn. There might be something after that, but for now, I don't see any checks other than taking the rook, which doesn't look very good because the knight would take our queen. So queen to c8, we're not going to choose for now. It might be a good move later. Look at captures. We have captures on e6. Looks bad at first because they have two ways to take our queen. And we have captures on a6, but that also looks bad because they would take our queen with the rook. The last capture was queen takes on d4. The last capture for the queen, and then we have rook takes on f4. Some may think, well, let's go ahead and take the knight with the rook, because then pawn takes, and then we win their queen. But this would not work, because black does not have to capture our rook right away. They can just take our queen with their queen first. So, this pawn has a tactic called overworked. He has the job of protecting two pieces at the same time. So, capturing the queen would be a equal trade, queen for queen. The pawn would then not be supporting the knight, and we could take the knight for free. And there we have it. Again, checks, captures, threats. We have a check here, we have a check here. They're both captures as well. We have a capture here, we have a capture here, and we have a capture here. I'll look at all the checks first. Checks are most forcing, hardest for the opponent to have a response. Queen takes on h7, king would take on h7, and there's no follow-up check. So I'm going to eliminate that for now. There are some times where you could do that and get away with it and win, and it's right, But in this case, it is wrong. We have another capture and check, which is on f7 with the queen. The two options they have is king to h8, which would immediately be followed up by queen takes f8 checkmate. So black would try to capture our queen with the rook. This should be a little familiar. The rook is protecting the back rank for the king. Making the rook move gives us a new check with our rook on e1 up to e8. Black would only have one option. That would be to bring the rook back from f7 to f8. And then we have two checks and captures, either rook takes rook or rook takes rook, both of which land a checkmate. Check. Check. And then checkmate with this rook, supported by the rook on f1, or checkmate with this rook, supported by the rook on e8. Sometimes, which rook will matter. In this case, it did not. And there we have it. Again, checks, captures, and threats. We have 0 checks in the position. All right, let's look at captures. What you'll notice as well is I've been ignoring the opponent's threats. The opponent here has a threat on our bishop. In other puzzles, they've been attacking our pieces as well. But we look for our attacking forcing moves first, so our opponent has to do something about that before they can do something they want to do. So, I see 0 checks. We have a capture on f4. Excuse me, capture on e4, and a capture on g2, and a capture on e6. Well, if we take on e6, it saves our bishop, but they can just save their bishop as well. They move it. If we take on b2, we hang our queen to 2 pieces. Also not a good move. So what about pawn takes on e4? Well, if we take their bishop, they take our bishop. Doesn't look very good, because it's just a trade. However, one more move ahead, we have a new capture with our pawn to take the knight. We could also take with the rook, but the rook is more valuable than a knight, and they could capture back with a pawn. We want to lead this attack with our pawn because he is 1 point. So captures, they capture back. Before I play the next move, I want to make sure the move I play is correct. Sometimes the opponent has a little trick and could promote, and it's safe to do. In this case, it is not safe, so I know that we don't have to worry about it, and we take their knight for free. Checks, captures, and threats. This one, I'll give you as a hint, and try to solve on your own. White to move, looks for checks first. If you found queen takes f7 check, you may have noticed that rook takes f7 is not a good move for white. However, that rook was protecting the back row. If you have not solved the puzzle yet, but this hint helps you, try again from this position after queen takes f7, rook takes f7. And then you will find rook to e8 check. And that would be checkmate because the rook will be pinned to the king by the bishop and not the queen. Another puzzle, checks, captures, threats. We have a check here with the knight. We have 0 captures. So 1 check. Is that check good? Well, it looks good at first in the sense that the bishop could take the queen, but the queen can move and take the knight and save herself. So we would just lose a knight. So we look at threats. Do we have any threats in the position? And yes, we do. We have what's called a double attack, which is moving the knight to a square, like f3, but it's safer, which is d3, which would attack the rook still, and the bishop attacks the queen. However, some of you may notice that the queen could take the knight on d3. That's when we look for another check in the position. We have a clearance sacrifice. If you found the check, bishop to h2, and we win their queen. Checks are very powerful. Forcing moves are very powerful. You can do this technique, checks, captures, and threats, up to 21, 22, 2300 in tactics. Sometimes they'll throw a curveball at you where it's technique. Sometimes it will be waiting moves, other chess tactical themes that you'd never heard of before. Takes practice, but you have to start with the checks, captures, and threats, as these are the easiest and most forcing, giving your opponent very few options to choose from. Last puzzle. Try to solve this one. Black to move. Go ahead and pause your video. Okay. Hopefully you have found rook to h1 check leads to a checkmate. Protected by the other rook, so the king cannot capture, so the knight will capture, only legal move. And then the follow-up is queen to h2 check, supported by the rook. The king has to go to f1, and then our queen will capture on h1 with checkmate. And there we have it. I hope this helps you guys when it comes to solving your tactics puzzles. As you saw, we went from like 1400 to 1738. And the only ones that are marked wrong down here are the ones that I purposely marked wrong, just to try to make the puzzles starting a little easier. What can help as well is on the side, you'll see puzzle themes. There's deflection, king side sacrifice. Sometimes these are right, sometimes these are wrong. For the most part, if you have a question, you can go ahead and ask me. That's what I'm here for. Best of luck, guys.